Some of you may notice that usually I have a guest with me for my Camino conversations, but this week it's just me, and I'm here to answer your most pressing Camino questions. So I have some that people have already asked that I'm definitely going to go over. And then I also have if you have questions, by all means, jot them in. Anything you want to know about the Camino, feel free to type it in, and I will be happy to answer your questions. And so I've got some questions already from folks. I've got your guys' questions coming in for sure. And then I've got a few categories of questions too. I've got, because there's the questions that people ask, there's the questions that they have, but they don't ask, usually not until they get to know me a little bit more. And I'm talking about clients here and people that know me about that know that I do the Camino. And then there's also I have a series of questions that maybe you should be asking that you haven't thought about. And all this to say, I am not here to stress you out about anything about the Camino de Santiago. I remember before my first Camino, when I was looking for the answer to a question online and ended up down a rabbit hole and was finding all of these questions that people were asking about the Camino that I didn't have. And I was worried, thinking, should I have that question? Should I even be concerned about that? Um, I'm trying to think offhand of what some of those were, but I remember one in particular was about the debate about whether or not to walk with smart wool socks. And at the time, it was my first Camino. I had been training with my regular cotton gym socks. I had never heard of wool socks except to keep you warm in winter. And so when people were asking about those, I was like, should I buy these socks? And I looked at them and they were socks, and I was like, "What on earth kind of socks are these, and why are they $15 a pair?" And so I wisely realized, okay, it was only a couple days before my first Camino, and not to change anything, because I'd been practicing in my cotton socks to walk the Camino de Santiago. So all that to say that I don't mean to intimidate anyone by going over these questions and answering them for you. I don't want anyone to worry. There are people who do the Camino without answers to a lot of questions or don't have a lot of questions and are just so determined to go that they just go and make it happen. So, obviously, though, there are people who do have a lot of questions about the Camino, and I am delighted to be here and answer those for you. So, again, if you are joining us and you're a member of Substack, you can type in your questions. And if not, just listen along and hopefully you'll get some good information here. So, I'm going to start with one that I got just recently. Someone asked if I have a list of recommended accommodations for various routes, and I don't. And the reason for that is that there's such a variety of accommodations on the most popular Camino routes that for me to say, hey, here's a list of my favorites, they might be my favorites, but they might not actually work too well for you. So because there's so much variation. Some people want a little bit more of the spirit of kind of a smaller place. Some people don't mind a bigger place. Some people want a private bathroom. Some people don't mind a shared bathroom. Some people don't want to be out of a town. They want to always be in an actual town. Some people don't mind if they're off Camino, for example. So no, I don't have a list of specific accommodations, but I do tell people it's kind of, for me, it's kind of fun looking at the different types of accommodations that are available. One of the things too is that since COVID, accommodations have come and gone. So unfortunately, there were plenty of accommodations that didn't survive COVID, and then there are plenty of other accommodations that have popped up since COVID. So, even if I had my list, if I haven't been on that route in a year or two or three, there might be other accommodations that are equally as wonderful. But in order to answer that question, when I work with clients to help them figure out which accommodations they want to stay in, there are a couple tools that I use that I love that I want to tell you about. One is godesalco.com. It's GODESALCO dot, I think it's .com. It's in Spanish, but nowadays, you can download whatever in order to translate into English. Although I don't recommend that you translate too much into English because all of the town names, they'll translate into English and then you can't find them on any map because, you need the name of the town in Spanish. But anyway, if you go to gotosalco.com, there's something called the planificador. I can't even say that word in Spanish, but it's basically the planner. And you can choose your route and you can choose where you want to start your Camino and where you want to end. And then it gives you a list of all of the towns between your starting point and your ending point. And in those towns, it then tells you if there are albergues or hostels or hotels and how many there are. It doesn't give you the names of all of them. I'm going to tell you about another tool for that, but it at least gives you an idea of what's available. And then it also has the number of kilometers between each town. So I loved this, especially, well, I use it anytime I plan a Camino. So I check off the town I want to start in, and then I can say, okay, I'm on my first day. I don't think I want to walk 20 kilometers. Maybe I only want to walk 18. And I can see, is there a place to stop in 18 kilometers? And does that place have an accommodation type that I'm looking for? So go to Salco.com is one tool that I love for accommodations. Another one that I love for accommodations is Gronze.com, Gronze.com. And this is another one that ultimately is in Spanish, but for what you're using it for, you can figure it out as far as it's got. You click on your route, and then it has the stages as they are traditionally. But for those of you that have been reading my stuff for a while, you know that you do not have to follow the traditional stages. But that's just how they have it organized. And then you click on, say, your first day, and it actually lists for you every type of accommodation, or almost all of them. There's definitely accommodations that are not in there necessarily that I've come across, but there's a lot of accommodations listed in there. And with information, you can click on them. Are they open all year? Do they only accept pilgrims, or do they accept other folks as well? What time do they open? How much? But you always want to check on that for sure. Some of them will have pictures of the actual accommodation, outside, inside. Um, they'll also have a link to booking.com. They'll have their phone number, their email address, their website. And a little note about booking.com. I will use that site as well to research accommodations, but I try not to book through them because I want to give as much of my money to the local accommodations as possible. And they have to, booking.com gets a cut of what I'm paying when I use them. So if I can, I'd rather contact accommodations some other way. If you speak Spanish, you can call them. A lot of them have a WhatsApp you can send them. Some you can book online. Some people do book everything through booking.com because it is such a great platform for keeping everything in order. But FYI, as another tool that I use, again, I just use it to get information. And one of my tips for booking.com is I go to the reviews, and you can search by keyword in the reviews. And so I type in the word Camino, and that way I see all the reviews where they specifically mention the Camino. So some of the reviews might say it's close to the Camino, really convenient to the Camino, has the Camino spirit, different things like that. So those are some of the ways that I hone in on finding the right accommodations. I shouldn't say the right accommodations because they're right is such a relative term, but for helping me to find accommodations on the Camino. So that's the first question here. And next question I have here, and this was from a father and daughter pair that I worked with that were going to do a Camino together. And the daughter was on our calls as well, high schooler. And she said to me, how come there's Camino Frances, Camino Inglés, Camino Portuguese? She says, these are all, why is there a Camino English, a Camino French, a Camino Portuguese when we're walking in Spain? And I thought, that's a really good question to come up with. And for those of you that don't know, it's because of these Camino routes were coming. The Camino de Santiago is a network of trails across Europe, all with the goal of getting to Santiago de Compostela. But the Camino Frances is where three of the routes that traverse France come together and then cross over the Pyrenees into Spain. And so that's why that one's the Camino Frances. The Camino Inglés is called that because if you were coming from the Inglés or coming from England, you would take a boat to A Coruña or Ferrol, and you would walk that route, which we now call the Camino Inglés. Camino Portuguese, same thing. If you're walking up from Portugal, when you crossed into Spain, you're on the Camino Portuguese. That's where you came from. So I thought that was a pretty cool question. Somebody else recently asked me about road walking and how much road walking there is on various Camino routes. This is an interesting question because I always tell people the Camino de Santiago was not created as a hiking trail to take you through the most beautiful countryside in all of Spain. It was created to get pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela in the most efficient way possible. So it is not necessarily going to be on beautiful hiking trails the whole time. And so that's something that I do let people know. Yes, there are definitely Camino routes that are more scenic in certain sections or for a lot of the route than others. But for me, one of the things I love about the Camino is the diversity of types of surfaces that you're walking on that bring you by all of these different things that introduce you to life in Spain, really. So yeah, there are definitely some trails, but you're also going to walk kind of packed dirt farm roads, for lack of a better word. You might be walking some secondary roads. You'll walk by vineyards. You'll walk by factories. You'll walk through suburbs of big cities. You walk through farmlands. Like there's so many different um, places through which you walk, in the geography of Spain and the geography of these different regions through which you're walking, depending on the route you're taking, is so varied. It's honestly something that I don't pay that much attention to. I am so enthralled with the Camino de Santiago in general and the experience of it. I don't mind walking on a road for a little bit. When my most recent time on the Camino Inglés, there was a section where we were up above a highway, but uh, so we weren't on the highway, but you could hear it going by, and that got frustrating pretty darn quickly because it was so loud. So that I don't appreciate. But I was with some great people that I met on the Camino, and we kind of, went through that experience together. So no, it's not always going to be beautiful, beautiful trail. That being said, when my husband did his first Camino, he wanted to choose a route that had kind of what he was looking for. He wanted, nice countryside, Spanish towns, maybe some cities. And so he actually chose that we would do the Camino Portuguese from Tui as our first route. I just came back from the Camino Inglés. I loved, having those first couple days walking, around the bays, the rivers, all that kind of stuff, the ocean. So yeah, there are certainly, the Camino Primitivo is very challenging. It's because it crosses so many mountains. So there's plenty of hiking trail on that route. So yeah, you can do your research on which ones have more road walking versus secondary roads versus trails. That is in some of the guidebooks. It's in various resources online. So valid question, but again, just remember that the Camino de Santiago was not created with the intention of keeping you on beautiful wooded trails the entire time. So another question that I got recently is the Camino religious? And this is, again, another question I like to talk about because absolutely it comes from religious roots. The Camino de Santiago was created so that because pilgrims wanted to walk to Santiago de Compostela, where the supposed remains of St. James were discovered. And thus the cathedral was built, et cetera, et cetera. So it definitely has religious foundations. Do you have to be religious to walk the Camino de Santiago? Absolutely not. And it's one of the things that I love most about the Camino trails. And I'm getting chills just saying this, that it is so inclusive that it doesn't matter what your religious belief is, whether you have one or not. It doesn't matter what your reason is for walking the Camino de Santiago. The Camino de Santiago is very welcoming of people from all walks of life, a variety of countries, variety of ages. And so even though, yes, it has its foundations in religion, and there are still absolutely religious elements of it today, you can definitely do it as a religious pilgrimage still today. But don't be turned off if religion is not your thing. Do not let that stop you from doing the Camino de Santiago. That said, I also have met many pilgrims in my walks on the Camino, on various Camino routes, who are not necessarily religious, but appreciate exploring that cultural aspect of the Camino. So they will go to a pilgrim mass that's offered in a town one night, for example. I like to go to at least one pilgrim mass when I'm on Camino, and I've had some pretty incredible um, experiences in those pilgrim masses. I was just at one a few weeks ago, and I talked about this in my series that I did live from the Camino Inglés, but a group of 80 people walked in like 2 minutes after the mass started, and people of all ages, and small group of them came up front. They had a guitar, they sang music for the mass. At the end, the priest came up to bless all the pilgrims, and invited us all up to the altar. And then he had the guitarist plug his guitar into the amp, and they played music again, and everybody was clapping and, dancing. I mean, it was incredible. And I also had an experience in Logroño. So for those of you that are going to do the Camino Frances, I highly recommend the Pilgrim Mass in Logroño. I was there last summer, and the priest there at the end gives an explanation of the altarpiece, because Logroño he said it's the only one along the Camino de Santiago whose altarpiece has scenes from the life of St. James. That's what it's all about. So you see him when he was preaching. There's an image of him uh, in when his remains were sailed on the boat to Padrón. There's images of his life throughout Santiago Matamoros, as Santiago St. James is known not just for his connections uh, as Santiago de Compostela, but also Santiago Matamoros. Mata meaning to kill, and Moros meaning the Moors. And so he was, for various miracles that are said to have occurred during Spain's Reconquista, when they were fighting the Moors, he became kind of patron saint. I don't know if that's the word for it, but so you'll see him represented two different ways. You'll see him represented as this pilgrim with his pilgrim outfit on, his pilgrim hat, and his staff. You will also see him on horseback, trampling at his feet the Moors, which, yeah, is certainly alarming. And a lot of the churches now have put something up below those, at the bottom of those statues and things, to kind of cover up the people that are really at the horse's feet, that in these war times and what they're doing. So it's really an interesting dichotomy between these two views of Santiago. But anyway, at the church in Logroño, the priest there goes through and explains, takes you through the life of Santiago through these images that are behind the altar. So that was a amazing experience. And so anyway, I can go on and on about the different experiences that I've had stopping in various chapels and churches and stuff along the Camino. So I would say do stop in, and if anything, if you're not religious, appreciate it as part of the culture of this route that you're walking and of this country that you're walking through. So for those of you just joining us, I am Rebecca Weston from the Camino Calls. I help people plan their walks on the Camino de Santiago. I also lead small group trips on the Camino. And I'm here answering your Camino questions today. So I have questions that I got earlier from people I work with, or people that wrote in when I said I was doing this. And then, of course, I'm answering any questions that you want to type in. So for those of you that are watching me live and have access to type in a question, feel free to go ahead and do that. And I'm happy to answer those. So another question that I've gotten here, let me pull up my list, is this goes, in the beginning, I talked about 3 types of questions: the questions you ask, the questions you have that you may not want to ask, and the questions that you should be asking. I say initially, people ask about all kinds of things, choosing a route, what shoes to wear, what to pack, things like that. And then a big one that comes up is, how far do you actually walk each day? So let's go there for a second. It depends. And for so many questions about the Camino de Santiago, that is the answer. But then what I especially like to do is, listen to, when I'm working with people, what their specific desires are for this Camino experience, and kind of plan it based on that. So for example, I just had a guy who walked a Camino only doing 10 miles per day. Now, some of you are saying, oh my gosh, only, but realize that all you're doing all day is walking. And so you get up in the morning and you have your breakfast and you start out going for a walk. And you do not have to walk all of your miles in one go. One of the things I love about the Camino is stopping. And whether it's on a bench, whether it's, if my body needs a rest, I will just sit on the side of the trail if there's, no place to sit. I'll stop and have a cafe con leche, a tortilla de patatas, which is for lack of a better word, a Spanish crustless quiche. It's basically eggs and potatoes. Great debate as to if you put onions in it or not. Some of them do, some of them don't. But anyway, one of the reasons I like the Camino de Santiago is for this reason, the ability to stop and, break up the walk, to the point that when I go hiking with people, there are groups that I have chosen not to go with because their mission is to get to the end and then turn around and get back. And I am so accustomed to walking Camino. Yeah, I have a destination I'd like to get to, but I enjoy the journey quite a bit differently than a lot of, the hiking groups that I've tried to join in the past. So I definitely take my own time. So as far as how far do you actually walk each day? Uh, so yes, I had a client who did 10 miles a day. I usually on average, when I'm doing a Camino of my own, do 12 to 15 miles a day, closer to the 12. And if we're talking kilometers, it's about 20 to 25 kilometers a day is 12 to 15 miles. But another question within that is how long are you walking? Because somebody could say, okay, I'm going to walk 12 miles today. And if you do the math, average walking pace is 3 miles an hour, right? So you think, okay, so that's going to be about 4 hours of walking. I will tell you that to do 12 miles usually takes me about 6 hours because I love to stop. So from the moment I start to the moment I get to my destination, I average 2 miles an hour, mainly because I'm not walking at that pace, but because sometimes I'll stop for a half hour or longer. Sometimes I'll stop for a good 5 minutes trying to get the perfect, shot of this beautiful scene in front of me. Um, Sometimes I stop to, chat with a pilgrim who's sitting there and, see if they need help or we strike up a conversation, whatever. So for me, who enjoys I am not one of those that's like, oh, I got to get to my destination as fast as possible. So you have how far do you actually walk and then how long it actually takes you to walk that far. Those are two different questions, but of course connected. And of course, the best way to figure out how far you want to walk on the Camino is to get out there and start walking and see how you do. And I tell people count every step because on the Camino, as soon as you wake up in the morning, you pretty much have breakfast. Maybe you don't, depends on who you are. And then you head out. And so when I'm preparing for Caminos, I count every single step I take because that's, from the moment I get up in the morning, that's what I'm going to be doing. How much time am I spending on my feet? How many steps am I taking? How many miles am I going? Uh, so if you have any other questions about distances or the time it takes to walk, by all means, feel free to write in a question here if you're live or respond to this video once it goes out. I love hearing what people are, curious about and things like that. Another question I get, and these two I've covered pretty well already in a lot of the posts that I write. I put a newsletter out every Sunday. And so, do I have to carry a backpack and do I have to sleep in hostels? And for those of you that have been following me for a bit, you know the answer to those. To both of those is no, you don't have to. You do not have to carry a backpack and you do not have to stay in hostels. And this is part of my mission with what I do is bringing more people to the Camino because I have met enough people that say, I would love to do the Camino, but I can't carry a backpack, but I don't want to stay in hostels. And they think that that's the only way to do it. It is not the only way to walk the Camino de Santiago. Are, can you carry a backpack and stay in hostels? Absolutely. Is that an amazing experience? Sure, depending on who you talk to. I've done it that way. I've done it many ways. But just, I want to make people aware that there is not just one way to do the Camino, as I have said before. And this is one of those things that there are services that will transport your pack from accommodation to accommodation. along most of the routes, most of the most popular routes for sure. The Frances, the Portuguese, the Norte, the Inglés. There are definitely services that will transport your pack. Most of them between all of those absolutely between May and October, and then some of them in the winter as well if you're looking to do a winter Camino. Speaking of which, another question I get is when is the best time to do a Camino? And I say whenever you can get there and go. Do not wait for the best time. It is one of those things, especially since a lot of the people I work with are 55 and over. And, if you want to, I don't know, go take that Alaskan cruise, sure, you can do that 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Are you going to be able to walk the Camino de Santiago 5 years from now or 10 years from now? That's more questionable. I hope so. But if the Camino de Santiago is something you want to do, I would get there and do it as soon as you can. Now that being said, there are some things to consider about the time of year, the route you want to walk, and things like that. And I did a whole series of posts on this. If you go to the Camino calls on Substack, I did a series of 4 posts on choosing your route. So there are definitely things to consider. But as far as when to go, yes, a lot of people that don't want too much heat and don't want to be cold will go usually in May and June and September into October. For example, on the Camino Frances, I volunteered in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is where a lot of pilgrims start if they want to do the 30-plus day Camino to Santiago. And according to the statistics from that office, May and September are hands down the busiest months in that office. July is the 5th busiest month um, behind May, behind June, behind August, September, and October. So I guess the 5th or 6th busiest month it was. So that surprised me, and it surprises a lot of pilgrims that I talked to when I volunteered there in July. And they ask me, how busy is it right now? And I tell them, you're fine. This is not the busiest time of year to walk the Camino de Santiago from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in July. Sure, there's going to be people who walk at that time of year and say, oh my gosh, but I had trouble finding accommodation. Whenever you read any of that, you want to figure out or ask, what they were looking for. So this is something that I like to calm people down about. Of course, my clients book ahead, at least 1 or 2 days, sometimes more, sometimes the whole thing. But for those of you that want to kind of go with the flow and not book ahead, if people are saying, oh, the Camino's full, everything's booked, you also want to ask, well, what kind of accommodations are they looking for? Because I have looked into this a little bit, and sometimes people are saying that because they're looking specifically for hostels. And what they mean is all of the hostel beds are taken. Or they're only looking specifically for private rooms and all the private rooms are taken. Or they're specifically looking for a private room with a private bathroom and they can't get that. So you want to, or they have a specific budget and everything within their budget is taken. So anytime that discussion comes up, I don't usually engage in it too much anymore, but just be aware. There are definitely times when the Camino is very full. May and September, hands down. If you do the last 100 kilometers in August, absolutely. That's when a lot of the Spaniards, when a lot of the Europeans have vacations. So they're going to go walk the last 100 kilometers of a Camino route. Okay, so on to another question I get is it safe to go alone? I have done the majority of my Caminos, probably just over half, and I'm at like 13 or 14 Caminos at this point. I've lost track. So over half of those I've done by myself. And I always tell people if you're going to do a Camino and it's going to be your only one or your first one, go on your own. And again, I'm getting chills just saying this. It is such an experience. First of all, to be able to do this the way that you want to do it without having to worry about anybody else who is walking faster than you, is walking slower than you, is not having a good time. It wants to stop when you don't want to stop or doesn't want to stop when you want to stop. All of these different things. There's just a freedom that comes in being able to do a Camino on your own terms. That being said, You can do it with other people by all means. And I also have a series of questions that I posted a couple months ago about questions you should ask if you are going to walk a Camino with someone else, because recognize that rare, rarely have you ever spent 24/7 with someone for 5 to 7 days or longer. And so just be aware of that. And I'll post a link to that in the notes for this live so that you can go through those if you're thinking of doing Camino with somebody else. But ultimately, not only is it safe to go alone, and safe in the sense that Spain is a very safe country. Obviously, 500,000 people walked into Santiago last year. That doesn't even count the people that were on various Camino routes and didn't walk all the way to Santiago. So obviously, if you think about a city of 500,000 people, yeah, there's going to be some problems. But in general, it is a safe thing to do as a single woman, especially. But you have to do all the regular precautions that we do as single women when we're traveling. Uh, Various things like I don't walk in the Camino before dark. Some people get up in the morning and start walking in the dark. I don't do that, mainly because I want to see what's around me, the scenery and the towns and such, but also a safety thing. I also, if I have any sense of like something's not right here, I stop and I wait for somebody else to come along, and I ask if I can just either walk with them or I just say how I'm feeling. And I say, do you mind if I just, even if they don't want to walk with me, I'll say, I'll just be a couple steps behind you. Can you just turn around like every, whatever, half hour and just make sure I'm still here or whatever. But ultimately, I don't want to scare anybody. The Camino is a very safe experience. Absolutely. Uh, Another question, this goes along the lines of, after the immediate questions get answered. This is one of those questions that not a lot of people, I shouldn't say this, some people ask, um, and I'll just tell you, is do I need to know Spanish? So the short answer is, do you need to? No. Will you have a deeper experience if you do? Absolutely. And it also depends on the route that you're on. So if you're doing the Camino Portuguese, the Camino Frances, you're going to meet a lot of people who speak English either as a first or second or third language. Um, so yes, you'll be able to communicate with various people. Will you be able to communicate with everyone anytime you want to get anything? No. It's a foreign country. Not everyone here speaks English, for sure. So, however, if you're looking to go off the beaten track a little bit, take a quieter route, it will be much more helpful to know Spanish because you'll be able to engage not only with pilgrims that are walking that are Spanish speakers, but also with the locals who you'll meet at the cafes or wherever you're staying or the town you're staying. I've had some wonderful experiences, having conversations with locals. So, do you have to know Spanish? No. However, if you have the time, I would highly recommend learning at least some. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I had a guest here on Camino Conversations, Maria Secco, and you can look up our Camino conversation. Again, I'll put the link when I post this video, I'll put the link below. And she actually teaches specifically Spanish for the Camino. And it's amazing how much you can learn in just a short period of time that will help you specifically with situations you're going to come upon on the Camino. Because if you learn Spanish through other means, you don't need to know about how to say, how old is your dog or something. You need to know how to ask for a bed and how to ask, what time breakfast is served and, ask how long this albergue has been here or, things like that. So she specifically works on things that phrases, sentences that you actually need on the Camino de Santiago, which I think is a really cool idea. Um, let's get into the biggest question that I think people should be asking, but they don't necessarily. And that is, how do I want to experience the Camino? Not just complete it, but what do I want this experience to be like? Okay. So in this way, I think so many of us are coming from a life that is so fast paced that I invite you to slow down on the Camino. This can be challenging if you come with someone who wants to just get to the destination, which is another reason I invite you to do the Camino on your own at your own pace. But so think about that. Think about how do you want to experience this, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Uh, I had a client recently, he starts out every day doing meditation. I have another client I'm working with who does yoga every day, and she'll do that on the Camino as well. Uh, I, for example, write every morning before I get out of bed. I write a few pages, um, normally in my everyday life, and then on Camino as well. Some people write while they're on Camino when they get into their accommodation, or they'll stop midway through their walk and do that. So decide, what are there some kind of reflective experiences you want to have? Are there and what are you looking for from this experience? Are you looking to meet people? Are you looking for something a little more solitary, to just be with yourself? And then recognize that that may change, but you also then have the right to, if you're meeting a lot of people and you feel like you're not having that experience that you want to have, you can say to people, and it's okay to say to people on the Camino, you know what? I think I'm going to walk alone this morning. Um, or you meet somebody on the trail and they start chatting with you, and it's perfectly fine to say, "Hey, this has been a great conversation, but I like to spend a little bit of time each day walking on my own. So I hope that's okay with you, but I'm going to walk on my own for a little bit." Perfectly fine to do that. So think about ahead of time, what is this experience that you want to have on the Camino? And of course, be open to changes that may come with that. I've also had people tell me, and this was all the way back since my first Camino, people who have said, I didn't walk my own Camino. I was walking someone else's Camino. And what they mean by that is that they ended up meeting people who were lovely people, and they ended up walking with them the entire Camino. And so they got this group and they would walk together every day. What time do you want to meet? Where do you want to have dinner? Da da da. And that's not the experience that they were thinking that they wanted to have, but they felt this pull of the group. Some people love that. Some people don't. I, for one, don't mind if I meet people, but I like to start out in the morning on my own. I don't want to necessarily have plans like we're going to start at 8:15 at this place. I've done it, and it's fine. And sometimes I will do it, but I like to start out my day walking on my own if possible. So just be aware of those kinds of things. Do you want to take rest days? Do you want to see some of the sights and some of the towns that you're going through if you're going to walk through some of the bigger cities? Do you want to be social in the evenings? Do you want to eat when the Spaniards eat, which is, they lunch between 1:30 and 3:30. And that's usually what I do. I walk with the goal of getting to my end destination by lunchtime. And then I don't even check into my accommodation. I go right to lunch. Um, and lunch is like a couple hours. I relax, I enjoy with whoever I'm eating it with. Dinner in Spain is not normally till 8 o'clock at night. And that can be early. I mean, the restaurants will open at 8, but um, in the very popular Camino routes, like the Frances, you'll have restaurants that'll open at 7, and they're serving food, but it's a pilgrim menu. It's not what the locals are necessarily eating, because the only people you're going to see eating at 7 o'clock on the Camino de Santiago are Camino pilgrims, not the Spaniards. But anyway, kind of decide what kind of an experience you want to have. Just think about that ahead of time. I would highly recommend. Another thing is, along those same lines, is how am I going to care for my body on a daily basis? So, for example, my friend who does the meditation, my other client who is going to do yoga every morning, me who does the writing, the writing is not necessarily for my body, it's for my mind, but um, I have a whole stretching routine that I go through every morning. It starts even before I get out of bed. So I think people do all of this planning around, where am I going to stay and what am I going to pack and what shoes do I need? And I don't think there's always enough thought about, how am I physically going to take care of my body? What are things, what am I going to do to take care of my feet? And I say to people, yeah, train for the Camino and see how your feet react, and figure out ahead of time, if you can, what problems your feet have and what are you going to do to help with those problems. Uh, Another question that people should ask that they might not think to ask is, am I open to changing my plans? The Camino has this wonderful way of throwing things at you that are a bit unexpected. I'm not saying your whole trip is going to blow up in your face or something, but I'm just saying that things do come up. Injuries or um, change of plans or terrible weather, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's pouring. Like you have to be ready for these things, and are you open to changing plans if you need to? So whether that's something as small as what time you're going to leave in the morning to start because it's pouring rain, and maybe you say, well, maybe I'll wait till see if the rain clears and then I'll go. You have to have a little bit more than a little bit of flexibility on the Camino. Uh, you can plan it as much as you want, and the Camino is still going to provide you with some unexpected things, a lot of times in a great way. But you also have to realize this is not one of those trips that you're going to plan. It's not like a cruise where every moment of every day you've got an activity and you know where to go and you know what it's going to be like, and you know how to get there and who you're going to sit with. I mean, it's nothing like that. A friend of mine, now a friend, a client at one point, who just finished a Camino in April. Actually, Tim Wesolowski, who was my first Camino Conversations guest, I'll link that post here. Um, I forget the phrase he used. He said it was like every time he woke up, it was like the first inning all over again, because you don't know you don't know what the trail is going to be like. You don't know what the place you're staying is going to be like. You don't know what the food's going to be like, what you're going to come across. So he's like, every day is is a new day, and it's not like you're going to go back and stay in the same place at night. It's not like you're going to stop in the same cafe that you did yesterday morning. So you have to have an idea of, it takes a bit of flexibility to do this thing. And then uh, the the final question, because I have just a few more minutes, that people have asked when I ask for people's questions. And this is mostly from people who have already done a Camino. They ask about adjusting to life post Camino because not a lot of people think about that before the Camino. And this is a real thing. And I had a client who said to me, you told us about that readjusting after the Camino can be challenging. And he's like, and I thought, what's she talking about? And then he told me after the fact, he's like, you're absolutely right. There are two books on this topic now, thankfully. One is called Returning from Camino. John Alexander Shaya wrote that. And then I just heard about another one, Living the Camino Back Home, which is Ignatian Tips for Keeping the Camino Alive, written by a Jesuit, Father Brendan McManus. So both of those I would recommend you take a look at. And Returning from Camino actually has you start before you leave and has you kind of reflect a little bit about this journey that you're about to embark on and what you hope to get from it. And then it has some things to do when you get back home. And actually, in my last Camino conversation 2 weeks ago with Dave Whitson, he and I talked about this as well, that adjustment period back home, in our interview. So I'll link that one as well. So this is definitely one of those questions that people do not ask, don't think about, usually until post Camino. And it is just something to be aware of, that for plenty of people, there is, life pre Camino and life post Camino. And you have to realize that this experience that you have on the Camino, it can be very hard to explain with people who haven't done it. It's not one of those things like, how was your trip? And you show pictures and everybody's like, oh, that looks like so much fun. It's such a different travel experience that it can be often hard to process with people who haven't necessarily done it. Some people, totally fine. Some people don't go through any of this. I'm not saying this happens to everyone, but there are various ways to adjust post Camino. These books are one of them, to read up on. Joining a local Camino chapter. There are Camino chapters around the world. The one that I first joined was in Asheville, North Carolina. Hello, my dear friends in Asheville, North Carolina. And every single Tuesday to this day, and I met them 12 years ago now, every single Tuesday they get together and talk Camino or reflect or talk about whatever else is going on in their lives. New people show up, hey, I want to do a Camino. And we, are so eager to help them answer their questions. And so I first found that group when I got back from my first Camino. And I'm so glad I did because uh, it really helped me to process the experience. So just something to be aware of. So thank you to everyone who wrote in with a question. Have very much enjoyed doing this and hope to get to do this again sometime soon. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next Camino Conversations. And if you haven't already, feel free to sign up for my newsletter, the CaminoCalls.substack.com, where every Sunday I post, Camino, all kinds of Camino-ish things. So a story, what I'm reading, any tips, things like that. So again, it's been a delight being here with you guys, and I will see you all next week. Bye bye.